What I see a lot in mentees is that they really do a poor job of listening. And listening is critically important if you want to advance the speed at which you do deals, find out what will make a deal go when otherwise it might not go. And to do that is difficult. Most people are thinking about a script or what they want to say next, and what someone is saying is going right over their head. So I wanted to do a presentation on listening and to walk you through that, and hopefully this will help you be able to listen. So let's go through and do that. Shut up and listen. Not that polite a topic, but a good subject to go through, so let's do it. Okay, so sales skills are essential in acquisitions, whether you're negotiating with a seller, pitching to lenders, hiring key team members. How well you sell determines your success. So the most overlooked skill in sales, I think, is listening. Tough. Why listening is the key to closing deals? Okay, let's talk about that. Sellers tell you exactly what they need. You just have to hear it. People buy from those who make them feel understood, not those who talk the most. And let's talk about some of the biggest mistakes made. Talking too much. So why do people overtalk in sales? Well, nervousness or fear of silence is a pretty good reason. Most people can't stand silence, so they jump in and talk. But they're also trying too hard to sell instead of uncovering what the other person's needs are, and then not trusting that the person will see the value on their own. So what happens when you don't listen? You miss key pain points that could help structure a better deal. You push the wrong benefits instead of addressing what matters to them. You don't know what matters to them unless you ask, what matters to you? What's important to you in doing this deal? You lose trust. People can tell when you're waiting to talk instead of listening. Okay, so the art of active listening. So how do you master sales conversations? So let's go through some tactics to improve listening skills. One, really important, the 70-30 rule. Talk only 30% of the time, but listen 70% of the time. That some people say, well, I'll lose control of the conversation. Not if you're asking questions and listening to what the person says. Mirroring. Repeat the last few words of that the other person said to encourage them to expand. And that's something that if you've ever heard of Chris Voss, he talks about quite a bit. So you might be talking about something like seller finance, and you hear, well, I don't know about that, it's too risky. Oftentimes, if you mirror that, to just say too risky, they will jump in and say, yeah, too risky because, etc. So strategic pauses. Silence makes people reveal more than they planned. Ask open-ended questions. Do you know what an open-ended versus a closed question is? An open-ended question is one where someone explains. A closed question is one which is a yes and no question. You don't gain much from that other than the yes or no. What's most important to you in this deal? Why are you considering selling? What concerns do you have about the transition? And assuming the deal makes sense, what is your time frame? Those are all questions that will elicit more information. So let's do a listening test. Let's test how your memory is. To do that, not only do you have to have a memory that works, but you also have to listen. So let's do that. So I'm going to give you 5 words. Remember these words in order. So 5 words, remember them in order. Fire hydrant, balloon, batteries, barrel, and board. Fire hydrant, balloon, batteries, barrel, board. Okay, so now write them down in order. So you're going to remember, hopefully, those 5 words that you heard, and you're going to write them down in order. If you need to pause this video, you can certainly do that. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you've done that. You've written them down in order. So those were fire hydrant, balloon, batteries, barrel, and board. So hopefully you did pretty well in that. You can do 10 of these. Most people don't get 10. But so how do you remember things? I use oftentimes a visual way. So I would picture a fire hydrant with a balloon tied to it. I'd pop the balloon and the batteries would fall out. The batteries would fall into a barrel and the barrel sits on a board. So that would give me fire hydrant, balloon, batteries, barrel, board, one way to do it. But that also works if you can't remember names when you're introduced as well. Oftentimes you're introduced to 2 or 3 people and you're thinking about what you're going to say next in that conversation. So if you were introduced to 3 people and they asked you, what are our names? Many people would have trouble with that. So I would do something similar to that. If I was introduced to a Brad and Sylvester, I might say, okay, Brad Pitt in Fight Club and Sylvester in Rocky, so they're both fighting. So yeah, Brad and Sylvester. So just one example. You can use any example that you like. Now, according to Chris Voss, who I mentioned about mirroring, he was a former FBI hostage negotiator. And this is really important. Communication is comprised of 7% of the words, 38% tone of voice, and 55% body language, meaning the majority of communication is conveyed through non-verbal cues like body language and tone, rather than actual words spoken. And this often is referred to as the 7, 38, 55. And think about your own experience. You can tell from tone of voice when someone's upset. You can look at body language and see, are their arms crossed, or are they leaning forward into you, or are they pushing back? But only 7% are the words. So when you're listening, watch for that body language and tone of voice. And that brings us to what's the difference between a phone call versus a Zoom or in person. A lot of people want to do phone calls, nothing wrong with phone calls, but you will have the words and you will have tone of voice. You'll have 45% if you add those 7 to the 38, but 55% body language, you're not seeing any of that. So if I had a choice, I would do a Zoom call over a phone call to be sure. In person's even better. But many people will focus on surface details and miss the real emotional drivers behind the seller's words. So, it's a lesson from this. Listen for emotions, concerns, motivations, not just facts. And the key takeaways? Hopefully you've remembered all of these. Sales is about listening, not talking. The person who listens best controls the conversation, particularly if you're asking questions. When you truly hear what the other person wants, closing the deal is easier. Maybe not easy, but easier. And a final thought, you don't convince people by talking. You win deals by making the other person feel heard. So here's a challenge for you. Over the next week, practice active listening in every conversation. Use the 70-30 rule and see how much more information you uncover. And oftentimes, when you're asking questions and listening, the other person is going to think you're a brilliant conversationalist because you are not just talking and you're letting them talk. So I hope this helped. But talk only 30% of the time and listen 70%. That's the message there. Okay, so I hope that helped. Remember to listen, shut up and listen, and you will do much, much better than if you don't do that. So I hope that helps. If you know the steps in doing business acquisition, great. The Business Acquisition 2025 edition, which you're hearing about or can see on my website, has been updated from the last one. Tons of change from 2023, so that could be very helpful. And I'll talk more in that also about sales skills, listening, and separating yourself from the bots. And one of the ways to do that is to listen to what people want to tell you about what they're looking for, what's a perfect deal look like, etc. So Take action, but know what to do, and then make changes accordingly based on the results.